Under those circumstances, that's the kind of torture that we're talking about.
All right, what do you feel about that?
I just think that, again, it's going to, even if you get the information out, there's hatred. And even if that person does get out of jail or from wherever, he might want revenge. And I'm sure the lady here can tell us that she has way too much hatred. And if she has the ability to get revenge, she will. And I'm sure a lot of people are able to get revenge, and they would. And that you're just going in the complete opposite direction.
Hatred happens regardless sometimes. People just hate. I mean, I've spent most of my life fighting terrorists one way or other. And I can tell you, you don't need necessarily to breed it up by a prison sentence. It's there.
Question for this side. Gentleman in the front row.
If you do not condone the current acts of torture being used nowadays in societies, what other methods would you suggest of extracting information required to save lives?
Irene Khan.
There are all kinds of intelligence gathering measures. Bob is the expert. He gathers intelligence not through torture. He's built a career of gathering intelligence by not using torture. There are effective means. There are effective means every day in the UK. Information is being gathered without torture. And what I'm saying is that those are the methods that should be promoted. If you give them an easy method, torture people, it'll go the other way, and it'll undermine, actually, a proper, sustainable intelligence strategy.
I don't agree, because, frankly, we'll do it through carvers. You've got to put it before a judge, and that judge is impeccable. And that's what you want.
Well, if I can mention, there is a case of a gentleman called Al-Libby. In his case, he was, we would call it tortured by the CIA. They then handed him to another country who again tortured him there. He provided information that Al-Qaeda was being trained by Saddam Hussein to use weapons of mass destruction. That information fed into the US justification for attacks in Iraq. And later on, in January 2004, the gentleman said that he recanted his confession because he had made it under torture.
Where do you stand on this issue?
I'm honestly against torture. I find it degrading in some ways, and as many people have suggested, it just leads to more hate. It just leads to people regretting the government, creating more terrorist groups that, honestly, the world has too many of them nowadays.
Under no circumstances?
Honestly, it depends on the circumstance. If thousands of lives are in weight, and like if you have to choose between hundreds of lives in one life, I would say take the one life for the 100.
Okay.
Isn't that a sad world? But it's real. It's a sad world, and that's the reality.
We're going to go to a gentleman up there in the top, 6th, 7th row back. You, sir. No, you.
Myself?
You. Yeah.
I actually agree with having the option of torture, as long as it's the last resort. But then, if we're gonna install some regulations for that matter, don't you believe or think that it could help us save millions of lives, if it is, of course, the last resort?
Irene Khan, do you want to address this?
The Israeli government tried it. The Israeli government introduced a system precisely of that kind of controlled, regulated torture in the 1980s, and they discovered that 85% of Palestinian prisoners ended up being tortured. And that's when the Israeli Supreme Court then tried to prohibit torture. So I think there have been governments that have tried to do exactly what Khawar and Bob are saying, and they have failed. And that's why, from our experience, from our research, it doesn't work. Torture is a slippery slope. You don't get on it.
Gentleman in the front row.
Thanks very much. The first thing, which is just a comment about the proposition speakers, is that they've been talking a lot this evening about coercive interrogation techniques and this kind of magic truth syrup which you can get at the pharmacy. These are all euphemisms. This side is not willing to say torture, and I think that that's something that needs to be recognized. But I'd like to ask Mr. Qureshi, specifically in relation to these impeccable judges. You know as well as I do that in the United Kingdom and in the United States, the Patriot Act and the various emergency control orders, and in Northern Ireland where you served, sir, special courts convene which aren't open to the public. So how do you actually propose for there to be any transparency for the checks and balances which your side have proposed? It seems that you'll have a regulatory framework which has no way at all of being assessed.
Well, if I can answer that question. Now, from your kilt, I see that you're a Scot. The process that you're referring to is a process that I've participated in as what's called a special advocate, where the court appoints an individual member of the bar, a barrister like myself, who has access to all of the intelligence information, who then cross-examines the intelligence officers so that the court can be satisfied that the evidence is sustainable. And you probably also know that cases have gone through our systems, and without exception, So far as control orders are concerned, our courts have condemned them. So far as detention without trial is concerned, our courts have condemned that. What's happening in the United States of America is a very different proposition, and the idea that we should take our human rights examples and that the tone for human rights should be set by the Israeli government, given what's happening in Israel, is an unfortunate proposition.
Lady in the fourth row.
This is for Mr. Qureshi and Mr. Stewart. I can't help but think sometimes that the reasons for legalising torture are very similar to the reasons for legalising prostitution. It's there, it's not going to go away. Let's acknowledge it as part of a flawed system, rather than addressing what's at the very basis of that system.
Bob Stewart.
I agree. We agree.
Yes.
We are arguing about a flawed system. This is not utopia. We are living in an imperfect world, and we've got to deal with it. And it's getting more imperfect.
Irene Khan, you're scribbling furiously.
Yes,
here.
I'm scribbling furiously because I think when you are young and you think this is a sad world and that's all it's going to be, so let's just keep it sad, I think that's a terrible indictment of youth. You've got to have hope. You've got to make it a better world for your kids, just as others before you have improved the world. So I don't believe, my starting point is...
You wanted to come in on this, Khawar.
It's a sad world that we live in, which is facing immense pressure. Do we give up on the rule of law? Do we allow states to create devices like Guantanamo Bay or subcontract torture or the use of coercive interrogation techniques, let's call it what it is, torture, to states such as Syria and Algeria? Or do we force them to confront the issue, and if they say that this is necessary, force them to go through a legal process to justify their position? I know what the answer is, and that isn't giving in to the negative influences, that is trying to prevent a deterioration.
All right, lady at the back there. You've had your hand up for a long time.
Mr. Qureshi, can you please clarify what lives have been saved as a result of the actions at Abu Ghraib prison?
The torture in Abu Ghraib was gratuitous. It was an abuse of power, an abuse of authority. It's a completely different situation to the one that we're talking about. And remember our starting point, which is we're not here to advocate, extol the virtues, justify torture. We're telling you it's happening. Would you rather pretend it's not happening and then allow states to do it behind closed doors? Or would you rather say to states, we know what you're doing, we want you to regulate this?
Irene Khan.
It seems to me that what we are talking about on the two sides are different techniques. We're talking about torture. You're talking about truth serums, injecting truth serums, which would not amount to torture. No, it would not, because
why are we banned from using it then?
There are issues such as ill treatment, inhumane treatment, and so on, but it's not torture. So I think we're almost talking apples and pears here.
No,
if that's what you're talking
forgive
about.
me, no.
But the kind of things that
that
cannot be regulated are those horrible actions.
Okay, let him come back.
The gratuitous use of violence to silence political opponents, to silence the opposition, for no reason at all, is utterly objectionable. And as I said to you at the outset, the Torture Convention has no ifs or buts. The reality is that what we, as a matter of law, define as torture is taking place in places like Guantanamo Bay. We know that. It is taking place in places such as Algeria and Syria through subcontracts, because states that otherwise want to hypocritically be seen to be complying with their international obligations are taking very careful steps to avoid legal sanction. Now, let's make them recognize they cannot do that and that they have to regulate a process if they're going to conduct it.
Okay, I want to hear back from the questioner.
Won't countries take advantage of that it's legal?
You're again missing the point, forgive me. This is not about legalizing torture. It's not about unraveling 25 years of prohibition. It is about confronting reality, making sure that our naivety, which insists on states adopting an absolute position, which they never will, leads them to be hypocritical and create devices so that they can do what they're going to do in any event, in pursuit of what they maintain is the saving of innocent lives.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, we've come to the point in the proceedings we're going to vote on the motion that this House believes torture is only acceptable under legal supervision. Would you please take your voting machines? If you want to vote for the motion, it is button 1, the yellow button. If you want to vote against it, it is button 2, the red button. Would you please just press those buttons now? You don't have to go on pressing them. All right, we should be getting the vote up now on the screens. There it comes. There is the result, 41.6% for the motion, 58.4% against. The motion has been defeated. All that remains for me to do is to thank our panelists who've come from London for the privilege. Thank you, the audience. We'll be back again in September. Till then, from all of us on the team, have a good summer. Good night. Goodbye.